We're going to talk about justice. Now, let me just say something about the word justice. Typically, in secular society, we use the expression social justice. And actually, a lot of what I'm going to talk about is social justice. But I'm not going to use social justice because it has lots of political connotations. And because of that, I'm just going to say justice. All right? So I just wanted to flag that. All right. Justice as part of our developing a biblical worldview. So as a connection with our previous talk on creation, I want to say a little bit about a counter argument that some people raise. And that is, they ask the question, what about natural evil? And have natural evil in quotation marks for a very specific reason. So people will say, okay, you argue that the world is created by a good God. What about natural evil? What about earthquakes, for example? What about floods? What about pandemics? How can you reconcile that with a loving God? Now, this would be a whole topic in itself. So I just want to provide a case study using earthquakes. So this is a little bit on the scientific side. Why do we have earthquakes? We have earthquakes because we have plate tectonics. If we didn't have plate tectonics, life as we know it, complex life, would actually not be possible. So you can't say, I would like to live on an earth without earthquakes, because if you're asking that question, you're asking to live on a world where you wouldn't actually be able to survive, that you wouldn't exist. We need plate tectonics, the CO2 silicate thermostat, the buildup of landmass, the variation in the topography, the fact that we have mountains, for example, the enhancement of biotic diversity, and enabling the magnetic field. There are a whole bunch of things, not just these things. And this is something that was pointed out by Ward and Brownlee in their book, Rare Earth. And by the way, this book, Rare Earth, makes the case that Earths like ours are rare. In fact, they say ours might be the only one. It's a very interesting argument. They're not making a religious argument. One of their students, or one of the, I can't remember which one of these scientists, a student named Guillermo Gonzalez, and he co-published a book called Privileged Planet, 2004. It's coming out, I believe, in a 20th anniversary this year. And they take this argument further, Privileged Planet, and they say that we absolutely are the only planet in the universe that has life, and intelligent life. And why are these scientists saying this? Because it turns out that more and more we realize that there are all kinds of things that we need. For example, we need a moon. Without the moon, we wouldn't have tides. We need a Jupiter-sized planet to take the hit of asteroids that otherwise might hit the Earth with catastrophic results. There's a whole list of things that we actually need to have life as we know it on Earth. So there are planets, astronomers know, there are planets that don't have plate tectonics. These are called stagnant lid planets, and they are inert. They're not going to have life because you need plate tectonics. So in looking at what are called exoplanets, so this would be sort of, a way of kind of controlling for a study of the Earth. What about other planets? Are there other planets like Earth? So on the habitable planet on the left, plate tectonics stabilize the surface climate and cools the interior fast enough to generate a magnetic field that in turn shields the surface from water loss and harmful radiation. The other planet, right, which is a stagnant lid planet, insulates the interior, inhibiting magnetic field generation, allowing water loss to space and rendering the surface too hot and dry for life. And then you have this CO2 cycling that happens because of plates colliding against each other. So here's an illustration showing possible climates for the Earth, steamball Earth. So this would be like planet Venus, or snowball Earth, it's too cold. Dry roasted Earth, it's too hot. And this is why often our planet is referred to as a Goldilocks planet. Everything is just right. We're in a habitable zone, far enough away from the sun. So we have earthquakes because we have plate tectonics. Because we have plate tectonics, life as we know it is possible on the Earth. You can't take away plate tectonics. So this relates to our first theme, which is looking at things holistically, looking at the big picture. And this is something that Job wrestled with, right? That we accept the good and the evil. Now, plate tectonics are not evil, but we would consider the human death toll from earthquakes as evil. But what is the cause of that? Well, let me just ask a question. How many people would die in earthquakes if everyone lived in tents? So the answer is some would die in tsunamis, but otherwise the death toll would be very low. So we choose to live in rigid structures. I'm not suggesting that we all live in tents, but we build buildings, and often we don't do a very good job, and they collapse. And it turns out that studies have shown that in countries where there's higher corruption levels, there is higher death toll, right? So New Zealand is in an active earthquake zone, and they had an earthquake a number of years ago, Christchurch, and the death toll was relatively low because they had earthquake prevention regimes in place as well. And Haiti, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. Now, of course, this is also a justice issue because countries that are poorer don't have the funding to have earthquake codes, etc. So we know how to mitigate the risk of earthquake. We know how to mitigate the risks of flooding. Stupidly, often we build in flood zones. We build right on riverbanks. They tend to flood. You can't throw your hands up and say, why did God allow this? It's our own lack of foresight. We need to understand the way the ecosystem works. So, is this actually natural evil or is it unnatural evil? Just think about these examples. Hurricanes and flooding, so I've alluded to some of these already. Global warming, insofar as it's a result of human activity, and it's certainly, the evidence shows that it is. Also, there are natural cycles, so it's very complex. The ill-considered siting of homes and areas of human habitation and coastal areas and floodplains, I referred to that earlier. Earthquakes, shoddy construction, and unstable multi-story dwellings. My father-in-law, I think it was in the late 90s, was in Turkey 2 weeks before a devastating earthquake, and he said he saw apartment buildings that were actually leaning. They were extremely poorly built, and apparently there's a lot of corruption where building inspectors are bribed to turn a blind eye, right? And this is one of the reasons why people die, unfortunately. Tsunamis, lack of warning systems, the defoliation of the mangrove swamps. So after the Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004, one of the things they discovered is that places that had defoliated the mangrove swamps, which provide natural protection against tsunamis, those were devastated. They had much more serious damage. Cancer and other illnesses, we know that a lot of them come from lifestyle and environmental contaminants. It's now becoming clear that dementia, Alzheimer's, was extremely rare in the ancient world. So it seems to have something to do with our diet and our lifestyle. Famines and desertification, lack of foresight in the management of agriculture and land resources, etc. Okay, so that's just a kind of reply to an argument that the world is actually not good, it's actually hostile, etc. Hopefully that is useful. All right, so continuing a little bit with the environmental theme, I'm just going to show you an image of the continental United States showing deforestation, 1620 to 1850 to 1920, and of course it's 100 plus years later, even worse. So the intact virgin forests are now a very small fraction of the continental United States, and this is of course true in places like Canada. I don't want to pick on the United States entirely. I'm going to show you two images from the tar sands in northern Alberta. And so this is a system of extracting oil that I believe, if I'm correct, it costs 1 barrel of oil to produce 2 barrels of oil. It's not very efficient. And look at the scarring of the landscape. This is air pollution in China, Harbin, China in 2013. Some of you may be aware of this, mountaintop removal mining. Now I've come back to the United States in places like Kentucky, where they actually blow the tops of mountains off, and this is what you end up with. Plastic pollution, of course, is a major issue. This damage that humans are causing. So this is, and this very sad image of an albatross from the Pacific Islands that had ingested all kinds of plastic. And so you can see the plastic there inside it. All right, so in the early 19th century, a German atheist named Ludwig Feuerbach said this: nature of the world has no value, no interest for Christians. The Christian thinks only of himself and the salvation of his soul. Now, actually, there's probably some truth in this statement. If one thinks of this kind of Platonic version of Christianity, where you're thinking of getting off the earth. And this involves the immortality of the soul, but also this view that everyone goes to heaven. Now, if you believe that, if you believe, for example, and I'll say something more about this, that there is a rapture, the Christians are raptured off the earth, and then God actually destroys the earth. Actually, that's a very common belief, that the earth is going to be destroyed. If you believe that, then why not continue to drive your SUV and pollute? Because after all, in a few years, Great Tribulation, the earth is going to be destroyed. So this is a kind of a corruption of Christianity that has come from a kind of Gnostic, Platonic view of things. It is not biblical, because the biblical perspective is the restoration of this earth, not another earth, but this earth. First time I gave this series of talks, we were staying with my brother-in-law, sister-in-law in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I couldn't help but notice this wheelie bin, Make Your Mother Proud, and it's Mother Earth. It's actually not a biblical concept. You don't find the concept of Mother Earth anywhere in the Bible, but it is associated with this idea that there are other views of the earth that are non-Christian that are actually better for the earth. And this is an argument that was made by a medieval historian, medievalist, a modern historian who studied the Middle Ages, named Lynn White Jr. This is, by the way, Lynn as a he, the historic roots of our ecologic crisis. So he made the case that there was this dominion as domination interpretation of the Genesis account of creation. And that this had led to the devastation of the environment. And of course, the 1960s is when the environmental movement really starts to take off. And so this is another scholar's summary of White's model. He said that you have the Judeo-Christian tradition, and then this leads to science and technology and a kind of exploitative view of our relationship with the world, the natural resources, and then you end up with environmental degradation. What Moncrief, who criticized this view, said, actually it's way more complicated than that, and a lot of it relates to the development of a kind of unhindered sort of free market, urbanization, increasing wealth, increasing population, individual resource ownership, and a lot of self-interest. And this problem with the environment is not a problem that's unique to Christian countries. It's universal. Asian countries, Buddhist countries, secular countries, the communist East Bloc during the Cold War, they had a terrible record on the environment, and they were officially atheists. So this is not, Genesis 1 is not saying that humans should have dominion as domination. This is instead a model of stewardship, of benign management that God has delegated to humans. And unfortunately, we have not followed that model very well over the years. And so this is extended into verses 28 to 30 of the book, of the first chapter of Genesis. And I want to turn to Genesis chapter 2, where we have this language of dressing and keeping the garden. So different translations take these, the two relevant Hebrew words there differently. ESV, work it and keep it. The God's Word translation, to farm the land and take care of it. And the ISV, the International Standard Version, to work it and to guard it. And there's a sense of protecting this gift of the good land and managing it. And I'm going to say something about the Shemitah, the land Sabbath, that is part of the Mosaic Law. All right, so I'm going to take you back to the early weeks of the Reagan administration. So here is an evangelical Christian who is very interested in the environment, commenting on his own tradition and how there is a problem with their view of the end times. So he writes, a famous proponent of this perspective of essentially leaping off the earth in the rapture, the first Reagan-era Secretary of the Interior, James Watt, the first Reagan-era Secretary of the Interior, in response to a question during discussion on February 5th, 1981, so that's very early in the Reagan administration, with a committee of the House of Representatives as to why his agency was acting contrary to his expressed mandate, Watt, a devout Christian, said, I do not know how many future generations we can count on before the Lord returns. Now, someone listening to that might have thought, whoa, that was a big leap. What is he talking about? Well, in other words, Stephen Bowen Prediger, the author of this book, For the Beauty of the Earth, says, since Jesus is coming back soon, and since when Jesus returns, everything will be destroyed. Why care about the earth? Yosemite or Yellowstone, Ile Royale or the Everglades, the park down the street, the local river or stream, your backyard. The popularity of books written by contemporary rapture-advocating writers like Hal Lindsey and Tim LaHaye attest to the allure of this eschatology. So the Left Behind series, I think probably many people are aware of that. And so if you think that God is going to rapture believers off the earth and then destroy the earth, there's no incentive to protect the earth, to manage it well, etc. So we see an interesting lesson in this in the story of Noah, Genesis 6. Now the earth was corrupted in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt. The earth was corrupt. It's interesting, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth, in addition. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. This is Hamas. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Now, the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and this is a different translation. And the earth was filled with violence, and God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt. For all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. So you can see that the term corrupt and the term destroy that's used by God are actually the same. So God is essentially reinforcing what humans had already started. And then again, there's that word Hamas that I referred to here. And violence, this word Hamas is refers to all kinds of violence, including physical violence, but also injustice towards the earth. And there is a kind of an irony in this language when you think of what it's saying, that the earth was filled with violence. So we just read, or I just alluded to a passage where we're supposed to fill the earth, be fruitful and multiply. And instead what was happening is the earth was being filled with violence. We go right to the last book in the Bible. There's this very interesting passage, Revelation 11:18. The nations were angry, but your anger has come. The time has come for the dead to be judged, to reward your servants, the prophets, your holy people, and those who fear your name, no matter if they are important or unimportant, to destroy those who destroy the earth. Now, Revelation is a very symbolic book, but at the literal level, it seems to be speaking about those who are destroying the earth. Is this referring to the environment? I'm not going to press that case, but it's very interesting language that we see here at the end of the Bible. So, do we decry the environmental crisis even while we do little or nothing to limit our contribution to this crisis? I mean, we as individuals, we as a community, we're very small. We can't have much of an impact, but it is important to be morally consistent. Some may say that it matters not as God will restore the earth, but isn't this akin to saying that we should continue in sin that grace may abound? So we want to be aligned with what God is going to be doing with the earth, which is restoring it. So I mentioned the Shemitah. So Shemitah, or in modern Israeli Hebrew, Shemitah. This is the year of release and the Jubilee cycle. And it's mentioned 3 times: Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. I'm going to go to the third of those, Deuteronomy 15, and you might like to take a look at it as well. You really need to look at all 3 of these passages together to build up a full picture. So we have in the Mosaic Law the 7th day of rest, and this applies to everyone. Even applies to beasts of burden, domestic animals. But there's also the 7th year of rest, the sabbatical year. At the end of every 7 years, verse 1 of Deuteronomy 15, you shall grant a release, and this is the manner of the release. Every creditor shall release what he has lent to his neighbor. He shall not exact of his neighbor, his brother, because the Lord's release has been proclaimed. Of a foreigner you may extract it, but whatever is yours is with your brother. But whatever of yours is with your brother, your hand shall release. But there will be no poor among you. I'm going to come back to that statement. For the Lord will bless you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance, if only you will strictly obey, there's a very important if there, the voice of the Lord your God, being careful to do all this commandment that I command you this day. For the Lord your God will bless you as he promised you, and you shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow. And you shall rule over many nations, but they shall not rule over you. Then it goes on to say, if among you one of your brothers should become poor, so this is a justice issue, if any of your towns within your land that the Lord is giving you, in any of the lands, if in any of the towns within your land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart or shut your hand against your poor brother, but you shall open your hand to him and lend him sufficient for his need, whatever it may be. Take care lest there be an unworthy thought in your heart, and you say, the 7th year, the year of release is near, and that's the Shemitah, and your eye look grudgingly on your poor brother, and you give him nothing, and he cry to the Lord against you, and you shall be guilty of sin. So now we see the text moving towards the description of the year of release. And so this year of release is a year of release from economic debts. It's a year in which Hebrew indentured servants are released unless they wish to stay with their families, their masters, with their families. But it's also a year of release for the agricultural lands. And this applies to fields, to vineyards, and to orchards. So the text goes on to talk about that. And this is a year when there's no active work on the land, and Israelites could just go through and they could pick the grapes and they could take what was growing naturally. So there's that very important statement. There will be no poor among you. Now, is this a statement about the way things were or the way things should be? We know from the Bible that there always were poor people. So this is at least what is called a prescriptive statement, right? God is saying, this is the goal, that there be no poor among you. And one of the reasons why you won't have this, at least as not as much as the other nations, is because you have this year of release, this economic reset button, and property goes back to the original family. And then, of course, in addition to that, you have the year of Jubilee. Now, imagine a society that had an economic reset button. There would be no 1%. We're talking about the 1%, right? Where you have this accumulation of a vast amount of the wealth of a particular country in the hands of very few. You wouldn't have that because you wouldn't have the accumulation of wealth and capital in this kind of system. So the modern nation of Israel has, not fully, but partly, re-implemented the Shemitah. And again, in Israeli Hebrew, it's pronounced Shemitah. And this is the term right there at the top. And this is the declaration. And they have said right at the bottom, recognizing that the values of Shemitah are fundamental to education in Israel, with the understanding that with the return of the Jewish people to Zion, the Shemitah year can now be actualized. We seek to revitalize the Shemitah year and establish it as a year of individual, social, communal, and national significance. And so some Israeli farmers have begun to reintroduce it. So the last one would have been 2021, 2022, the one before that, 2014, 2015. So it's every 7th year. Here's an Israeli Shemitah source book about how this works. And this is an Israeli vineyard where the Hebrew there says it's a Shemitah year. You can come in and just pick grapes. We're not actively managing the vineyards. Now, there is what is possibly a workaround. And you can see this is an Israeli Jewish man. He has a side lock, so he's obviously a religious Jew. And so the argument is that if there's a gap between the soil and, in this case, hydroponically grown lettuce, then the Shemitah doesn't apply because it's all about restoring the land. Is this a workaround? Is this a cynical workaround or not? I'll just leave that out there. Another workaround or possible workaround is that some Israeli Jewish farmers will sell their property to an Arab for 1 shekel for a year, and then they'll keep harvesting it. So it's not actually Jewish land. That, I think, is clearly a workaround. So this is human nature at work. And this is one of the reasons why so many aspects of the law are enforced quite strictly. The Sabbath is enforced quite strictly because, if you give an inch, they take a mile, right? And in Nova Scotia, when we arrived in 2001, there was no Sunday shopping. It was like going back in time. And it was actually quite refreshing. It was a day when you actually had to spend with your family, basically. And then over time, some of the stores started to push against the government. And there was a law that allowed you to have a certain square footage open on Sunday. So this allowed the mom and pop corner stores to survive. And what happened is the big grocery stores started to section off a part of the food floor and said, this part is open. And they had these cash registers on wheels, and they moved them into place. And they did that for a few weeks. And by the way, I should have mentioned, there was a referendum, a vote in the province of Nova Scotia on Sunday shopping, and it was rejected. So the people had said, no, we don't want it. It was close, but the people had said they don't want it. And so eventually the government just caved in. And initially they said, no one will be forced to work on a Sunday, and that's gradually been eroded too. And then they started to expand Sunday hours. And this, of course, happened much earlier in some jurisdictions in the US, for example. So I think this helps explain why some rules in the Mosaic Law are held quite strictly. So Adamah, this is this Hebrew word which means ground, and is also cognate with the word for human. And it's used in discussions about the environment within Judaism. And something else that we find in Judaism is the Tu B'Shvat. This is the New Year of the trees, which involves planting trees. I should have updated this to get the date for 2024. And that was implemented in the 1890s in Israel. So that's not a biblical law, but it is something that has been implemented in Israel. All right, so let me just give you another example of what we find from archaeology. On Friday night, we looked at archaeological evidence for what people looked like. when we're talking about race and ethnicity in Bible times. So here's a scholar, an Israeli scholar named Abraham Faust, who published a paper in Biblical Archaeology Review in 2013. Some of you may be aware of that journal. It has authors from various different backgrounds, some that are not believing, so you have to read it with discernment. But this was a very interesting article. And what he showed is that archaeology demonstrated that from around 1200 BC to around 700 BC, Israelite and later Judahite society was characterized by egalitarianism and simplicity. By egalitarianism, I'm not using that term in a modern sense. What they found is simple burials with no grave goods, standard four-room house with no hierarchical design, imported pottery, which is a luxury good, was rare, and lack of royal inscriptions. But then by around 700 BC, we start to see a reversal of this. So you start to see wealthy people being buried, lots of grave goods. You start to see larger houses for the few, and you start to see imported luxury goods. And you also start to see royal inscriptions. Now, these are actually quite useful because they tell us a lot about what is going on, but this is, the sign that the society was actually becoming much more hierarchical. So here's an excavation of a standard four-room house, and this is a reconstruction of it. So these are not tiny little things. They're actually quite functional, and you would often have animals in there as well. And you could sleep on the roof in the hot months where it was a bit cooler. But again, this starts to break down. So the Mosaic Law, archaeology shows, actually helped buttress an egalitarian society. Again, you had the economic reset every 7th year. And so you don't have this accumulation of wealth that we often have today. Okay. Words for righteousness and justice in the Bible. Some of you may be familiar with all of these or a few of these. Tzedek, righteousness, justice. Tzedakah, tzedek, to be just, that's the verb. And tzedek, the just or righteous one, or it's an adjective, but it can become a substantive to refer to someone who's righteous. Mishpat, justice or judgment. And then in the New Testament, we have this word dikaiosune, which is the standard word that's used for righteousness or justice. All right, so back in Deuteronomy 16 and 20, we see this expression. It's very powerful. Tzedek, tzedek turdof. Justice, justice you shall pursue. So this is a command that the society should pursue justice. And it's emphatic. You have this word tzedek repeated twice. Justice, justice shall you pursue. This is one of the goals of the society that the Mosaic Law describes. So there are many examples of this kind of justice principle in the Mosaic Law. And I'll just dip into a few of these. We won't look at them all just in the interest of time, but if we go to, we're in Deuteronomy, so why don't we stay there? We've already looked at a couple from Deuteronomy 15. Let's go to Deuteronomy 16. Deuteronomy 16 and 18. You shall appoint justice and officers in all your towns that the Lord your God is giving you, according to your tribes, and they shall judge the people with righteous judgment. You shall not pervert justice. You shall not show partiality. You shall not accept a bribe. For a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and subverts the cause of the righteous. Justice, the only justice you shall follow, that you may live and inherit the land that the Lord your God is giving you. So there's that language again. So this is part of the law of Moses. Now, remember, the law of Moses is not exactly the same as what we find in the New Testament, because the New Testament gives us principles not for a nation, but for Christians, for believers. Whereas the Mosaic Law gives religious principles, but of course it also gives principles for a nation. A nation that has a territory. That's why there's the Shemitah, the land Sabbath. So there's a lot in there that relates to the running of a civil society. And justice is one of those components, a very central component of the Mosaic Law. Now, this also connects back with our understanding of the oneness of God. There is a unity to the human race. It relates to the problem of racism. From a biblical perspective, there should be no racism because we believe that all are creations of God. All humans, unlike animals, unlike any other aspect of creation, bear the image of God. Not just some humans, not just the Jews or any other group, but all humans. And all humans have the same maker, the same creator. So this is one of the founding principles of biblical justice. And we see many examples in the Hebrew prophets. I'll just go to Isaiah 3 as a sample. Isaiah 3, many examples of the teachings of justice in the Hebrew prophets. I'll start with verse 13. The Lord has given his place to contend. He stands to judge peoples. The Lord will enter into judgment with the elders and princes of his people. It is you. This is a condemnation. It is you who have devoured the vineyard. The spoil of the poor is in your houses. What do you mean by crushing my people, by grinding the face of the poor? That actually comes into English as an idiom, declares the Lord God of hosts. This is a very powerful example from the prophets where we see God speaking through Isaiah, condemning those who oppress the poor. So this is a justice issue. Let's go to 11, verse 4. This is a very important prophecy in its own right. There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit, and the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. And his delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge by what his eyes see, or decide disputes by what his ears hear, but with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. So again, you can see these passages here. The prophets are filled with these statements about justice. Well, let's go to one more. Amos chapter 2. Amos 2 and verses 6 and 7. It's a very powerful passage. So this is condemnation of Israel. Thus says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Israel, and for 4 I will not revoke the punishment, because they sell the righteous for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. Those who trample the head of the poor into the dust of the earth and turn aside the way of the afflicted, a man and a father go to the same girl, so that my holy name is profaned. And they lay themselves down beside every altar on garments taken in pledge. And in the house of the Lord they drink the wine of those who have been fined. Chapter 4, verse 1. Hear this word, you cows of Bashan. This is about luxury. Who are the mountain of Samaria, who oppress the poor, who crush the needy, who say to your husbands, bring that we may drink. The Lord God has sworn by his holiness that, behold, the days are coming upon you when they will take you away with hooks, even the last of you with fish hooks. This is a reference to the Assyrian deportations. So we see positive statements about upholding justice, but also condemnations when that is not happening in the land. There are lots of examples of that. All right. This continues in the New Testament, Matthew 19. Let's look at that example. Matthew 19 and verse 21. This is the story of the rich young man. It's a very interesting story in itself, when the man asks him, what good deed must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus goes on to talk about keeping the commandments. And the man says, which ones? You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, honor your father and your mother, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself, something that is a very important principle of justice. Talked about it last night, and we'll talk about it again in our exhortation tomorrow. The young man said to him, all these things I have kept, what do I still lack? Jesus said to him, if you would be perfect, go sell what you possess and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come and follow me. When the young man heard this, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. So that's a very radical example of completely divesting yourself of your wealth. It's an ideal, and I don't think any of us follow it fully, but it's also a justice principle. Some interesting examples in the book of James that I think many are familiar with. All right, so we're going to wind down our presentation and look at a few other passages that speak about justice. Psalm 34, this is from the ESV, verses 4 to 5. For the word of the Lord is upright, and all his work is done in faithfulness. He loves righteousness and justice. The earth is full of the steadfast love, chesed, of the Lord. He has told you, O man, what is good. And I have the original Hebrew there noted with asterisks. O man, he has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly before your God. These are words to live by. Zechariah 7, verses 8 to 10, this time from the NASB. Then the word of the Lord came to Zechariah, saying, thus says the Lord of hosts, dispense true justice, mishpat, and practice kindness and compassion, each to his brother, and do not oppress the widow or the orphan, the stranger or the poor, and do not devise evil in your hearts against one another. Now, those categories, widow, orphan, stranger, and the poor, those are the four categories in the prophets of the marginalized, right? They don't all appear together, but here all four of them appear together. So these are people in that society who were marginalized, who were disempowered, who were economically weakened. The case of the widow, because the husband, the main revenue generator in the family, is out of the picture. Similarly with the orphan. The stranger is the person who comes in the land, who's supposed to be treated in a hospitable way, and unfortunately often was not. And then, of course, the poor, who they're marginalized, they're disempowered because they don't have wealth. And often the justice system works against them, and that is something we've seen hinted at in a couple passages already. Psalm 30, verse 18 from the NASB, the Lord, Yahweh, is a God of justice, right? So this brings us back to our first theme, that of God. Therefore, the Lord waits to be gracious to you, and therefore he exalts himself to show mercy to you. So he's an example to us. For the Lord is a God of justice, mishpat. Blessed are those who wait for him. Psalm 85, steadfast love and faithfulness meet. This is one of the most beautiful passages in the Bible, to my mind. Righteousness and peace kiss each other. Imagine that. It's obviously metaphorical, but it's a very profound thought. Faithfulness springs up from the ground. Righteousness looks down from the sky. It's if the text is saying that these things are embedded in the fabric of creation. Actually, I think the text is essentially saying that. So those are some things to think about. They have more practical consequences about how we operate in the world, how we deal with our brothers and sisters in the flesh, our brothers and sisters in Christ, our neighbors, etc. We're going to say a few more things about this when we talk about love in the exhortation, but these are themes that also emanate from having a biblical worldview, that we don't just think about it intellectually, that we believe in God, we believe that the world is creation, but we also believe that knowing those things, we need to act in certain ways, and acting justly is one of those things that comes from a biblical worldview. That's the end of the third class.